Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Thursday night, January 14th, 2021. It's a little bit past 9 p.m. on the East Coast tonight. The bells have already chimed.
They've already chimed. The bells of my small community have already chimed. 9 tolls of the bell. I don't know. Am I fuzzy? I feel like I'm off now because I'm all fuzzy. Anyway, let's go on. We have a great guest tonight. I don't want to
We do.
make
We
my
do.
weird internet connection screw things up.
Well, I would say it's the elephant in the room right now, so we have to mention it. But so we're not sure about Lance's internet at this point, or whatever is going on. Hopefully, it gets better as we go. And if you are watching this on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, why don't you click the link and toggle your butt on over to Get Vocal and converse with us here. There's a chat room full of people. Sarah Turney's in the chat room. This is a great time. Pi Rational's in there. Jason Watts, Uncovered. Jillian Kuzma, Susie Summers, LA Not So Confidential. Robin Warner's in the chat room.
The whole crew's here. Shannon's
hi,
here.
Robin.
Jason. We got All Line is here.
Yes.
Well, partially.
But our special guest here tonight, joining us in one of the squares, is Laura Norton from the Fall Line. How are you tonight, Laura?
I'm great. Waiting for my son's melatonin to kick in.
Wow.
He's
Oh, okay.
He's watching he's watching BattleBots with his dad, and fingers crossed he doesn't make an appearance. So
Even if he makes an appearance, he's welcome on the program with open arms. This is a safe space for everybody.
Try and tilt it up just a little bit in case he wanders in. There we go. Small children, but yeah, we're doing great. I'm here, and also for those of you just joining, a Fall Line research assistant is also in the chat, and he's kind of more than a research assistant on this project specifically. His name's Brian Waters, and I actually met Brian because he and I both work with Transdo Task Force, who are the Redgraves, who also do Redgrave research. Brian also now interns with them in forensic genealogy. But we met together, he and I met in their volunteer group, and I found out when we were really early on in the stages of the Sam Little research that Brian had been compiling his own stuff for years, right, Brian? For a long time. And so, like any smart person, I hired him. And he helped me research the entire series. Like, he made so many spreadsheets and timelines because this was a huge one. Normally, we're working with no information, and I'm building primary research out. Like, I'm doing my own interviews, I'm doing my own primary research, or we're pulling like archival research. In this case, there was a lot of stuff, to gather, because we were looking at 50 something cases in the South, so Brian really helped organize it. And not only that, but he also actually fact checked the series. So that was pretty amazing to have as well. So I still, to this day, like, I was talking to him and I was like, what do you have? What are the updates? And he had them ready because he has his Google alert set. So he's here as well.
That's really cool. And we have Michelle, who is a master links in the chat area. A link for transforce.org, and she also put the falllinepodcast.com in there. Really amazing work. Amazing.
Michelle, will you put Redgrave for research too? Just so they can kind of see that cool stuff that they do. They do the forensic research. Awesome. So that's
okay.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, what more specifics about Redgrave?
Oh, well, the Redgraves are our friends who run the Transdo Task Force.
Okay.
But they're also forensic genealogists, and they're training a lot of people right now through internships to be forensic genealogists. So they just do a lot of cool stuff. Like, they're working on programs to train law enforcement. Like, they have a lot of stuff going. So it's just interesting stuff to check out.
And thank you very much to Jason for the V coins in the chat room. We appreciate that.
Thank you for the Hedron reference too. Aside, do you guys remember like viral people? You remember that from like the must have been the late 80s?
I mean, I don't remember it happening at the time, but I remember hearing about it on podcasts.
Oh yeah, I'll just say this on a side, and then we can move on. If anyone wants to freak themselves out, just YouTube Max Headroom video. One of the creepiest things that's ever, the creepiest practical jokes ever been pulled on the pub. You're muted.
Oh, that's a good point, Michelle. Yeah, Anthony Redgrave did an interview on Dialogue with Rebecca
Okay.
really recently.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
We'll definitely check that out. Okay, so Laura, the Fall Line, tell us a little bit about your podcast. What do you guys do on the Fall Line, and who's your co-host, and who else do you work with?
Well, so I created the Fall Line with my friend Brooke Hargrove about 3.5 years ago. It'll be 4 years in May, which is wild. We started out on one case, and that all kind of came out of actually me hearing about a case on Robin's show, and then I'm a professor, and then using the case in my class to talk about missing white women syndrome and how it was impossible to research. I was teaching my students about the difficulty of research, cause and effect arguments. Then I got kind of caught up and angry about the fact that there was no good research available on the case. So then I was like, well, here's a skill I have that's usually very useless, but maybe actually could be useful for once, a highly unmarketable skill I have of researching things. So we ended up meeting and working with the Millbrook twins family, Shantae Sturgis and her family, me and Brooke. Brooke is a therapist. She's a licensed professional counselor. I decided to work with Brooke on this because Brooke is trained in trauma and grief counseling. And if we were going to be talking to families and people who had suffered through stuff, I didn't feel like I was trained to do that. And so we definitely wanted to have someone who could do that. So we started working with the Millbrooks family, and it just kind of blew up from there. And we really found out that we love doing it. So what we do is we look for cases where there's just very little information available, where we can be helpful. We look at communities that don't get covered, who have experienced marginalization for like a wide variety of factors. It can be like because of employment. It might be because someone is working in sex work. It could be because someone's living without documentation. It can be for just so many different reasons. And what we try and do is talk to as many people as we can. If it's a Doe case, we talk to forensic experts. If we're looking at a victim with family, we've tracked down the family, the law enforcement, interview them. And our goal is to provide listeners and the public with action items, good research and good information on a case, and hopefully some stuff to think about why the case didn't get covered in the first place. And perhaps sort of like why we as a society allow things like, the crimes of Samuel Little to happen, because, a big focus for us on that series is Samuel Little's not special. He's not a genius. The myth of the genius monster serial killer is something that drives me insane because what people do is they prey on people on the margins because it's easy. And it's because we allow these large margins of vulnerability to exist by doing things like criminalizing sex work and criminalizing people's livelihoods and criminalizing people's existence. That's how this is allowed to occur. So that's a really long speech, but that's what we do, and it's what we really like doing. Sometimes we do it in big, long series, sometimes we do like one episode. We also do interviews with experts, and they can be experts in anything from like forensics to family advocates to people, we're doing a series on databases, people who built their own databases. So lots of different stuff.
At the beginning of this, I really want to unpack what you said about the serial killers who are very prolific, but they're not the genius serial killers that we've all been accustomed to seeing in like movies and television. They're preying on the marginalized community, and they know they are. I want to get into that, but you mentioned the Millbrook case, the Millbrook twins, and that's Danette and Jeanette Millbrook. For anyone who doesn't know about that, can you give a little background on that case?
Sure. And this is a case that we're still really involved in. And I know we'll have way more announcements, and you guys will as well later in the year about that. But the Millbrook twins went missing in Augusta, Georgia in 1990. They are 15-year-old twins, and their case was just horrifically mishandled. I don't know of another case that was handled this badly. A few come close, but this is the case that was just the most grievously mishandled. It was improperly closed by an investigator who labeled them as runaways because they were young Black adolescents living in the South and their families didn't have a lot of money. He actually manually took them out of NCMEC, had to make a phone call to do it. They were improperly marked as found. They were never found. He would later say, or allegedly say, didn't say it to my face, but was told via the media that there was a report that came in that they were seen, and that's how it got filled out. So the case was closed for 13 years and wasn't opened again until 2013. So all of these chances to match them against people, and to check them and to run their social security number, everything, check with Doe cases, none of it happened. So even after their case was reopened in 2013, just nothing was really happening. And their family had just gotten incredibly frustrated. And so that's when I believe a woman had contacted a few podcasts, and that's when Robin had covered them on The Trail Went Cold. And when I heard it for the first time, and we live 2 hours from Augusta. So we got in contact with the family and just worked on covering the case and just found out all this stuff. Like there was a serial killer living in their neighborhood. There were 2 unidentified Black female does about 30 minutes away that had never been compared. They were found in shallow graves, just all of these things that, while not necessarily related, should have been looked at, but weren't. They hadn't been compared to anything. And it just sort of opened up and just showed all of these crimes in Augusta and Aiken, which is in South Carolina. It's like real close by. There went my accent. In South Carolina, which is real close by, over the line, like 30 minutes, just so many of these open cases that hadn't been compared against the girls. So, and our listeners got really involved. They raised a $10,000 reward in the case, and also raised money for a billboard, which has been up for 2.5 years. And right now, this is cool. We've been raising money for a new billboard, but the billboard company just told us that they're going to give us the biggest one in Augusta, this huge billboard facing the highway, for like 1/3 of the price. And it looks like a company, I won't say who it is also going to be adding to the reward. So things are looking really good right now on that side.
Yeah, that's really
awesome.
cool. And when you say us, who do you mean? The Fall Line cast and the family and the coalition of people that have been assembled because of the attention you have brought on this?
Yeah. The us, when we talk about so we work, it's like me and Brooke and Shantae mostly, who is the twin sister, who work on this mostly. And then we have a good friend in town. I mean, there's a lot of people who help out, We have a good friend in town there who's a local reporter named Renetta DuBose, who's wonderful. So just there's people, there's other family advocates like Donna Green, who was in season 3. Her son's Raymond Green. He was kidnapped as a baby after a stay at Grady Memorial Hospital. She's helped out a lot. So just sort of like this sort of extended podcast family, of people, involved. Everybody who works on the podcast is involved in some degree with helping with this work. But, also it's our listeners are the ones who've kept it afloat and paid for it. There are listeners who donate every single month. Michael Whelan from the Unresolved podcast, when he lived in Augusta, he would take the checks down there. I'd send him the money and he would take the checks down there and pay the billboard guy every single month. So it's been a group effort to get it done.
Did you ever expect that? What I know.
No, I mean, I didn't expect
a terrible
podcast.
Question. Obviously you're not going in expecting a community movement that will direct billboards and like that, but what's your level of surprise?
I think that one thing that Shantae said really early on, and she said this when whoa, there went my earpod. I can't be moving around so much. There we go. One thing Shantae said really early on, can you still hear me? Okay, it didn't ding back on. So she said that she always thought for the longest time that nobody cared. And then she realized that just nobody knew. And it really struck me about like that's when I began to think a lot about true crime media and why I think that mainstream true crime media is so far behind podcasts. Because I think mainstream true crime media has only in the past, maybe since this summer, really started to pay attention to cases that are not the cases they've covered for the past decade. But I think audiences want to hear about everybody in our country, right? And not just a small percentage of people in our country. And so I think when people heard about the twins, I think they were like, holy hell, how, two 15-year-old missing twins are super rare. The numbers and statistics change and there's like familial kidnappings, but to the best of our knowledge, they are the first instance of missing twins who are still missing today in the US. And that's, we can't get the data perfect because, not everything gets archived, but that's our best estimation. And that should have been national news, like 15-year-old twins going missing together. And the way in which they went missing, it's extremely obvious they didn't run away. Danette was epileptic, and she needed her medicine. They had asked a friend to walk them home. They didn't run away. But I think when people heard that, so on one hand, I'm not surprised at all because the story is extremely arresting, more surprised that we managed to get it out there and that people were so willing. Maybe that everyone's been so willing to keep helping. I'm not surprised that it caught on, but just the how people will just donate month after month and keep helping it stay up, I think is what really strikes me as wonderful,
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to emphasize, move on. I want to emphasize that you said the Millbrook twins are the only outstanding twin case?
No, they're not the only outstanding missing twin case. There's other missing twins, but as far as we know, because there's twins who've gone missing since they've gone missing, right? But as far as we can tell, the time they went missing, there were no other twins missing. So at that time, so there were some that had gone missing, but had been recovered. There were some that had gone to Canada. Like there was like a set of twins. And like I said, I don't want to write this down anywhere because the data is not perfect. And every time I think I have it, another case pops up because I get access to a new archive. But as far as we can tell, when they went missing, there were no other missing twins at that time in America. There was a set in Europe, but so that really should have been some news, and yet it wasn't. And I mean, it ran up right against the Masters tournament in Augusta. If you guys don't watch golf, that's a big thing. Augusta doesn't want bad press, and it's kind of just a perfect storm. I mean, they didn't even make it in the newspaper. And I know because I went and I sat in the archives room and went through every single, even little piddly newspaper they had in Augusta, I went through every single one. They didn't make it into a single one.
Let me ask a tough question,
Mm-hmm.
which you know the answer to. If they had been two young white women, would they have made the newspaper?
I mean, I think you answered your own question.
This is ridiculous. Like the Masters comes into town and that's we have to cover the Masters when the twins that are missing blows my mind.
Well, and I think that they were treated like, the phrase, Shantae remembers the phrase unruly runaways being used, and this is already treating children like adults, which happens quite a lot, especially with children of color being treated like adults when they should be being treated like children or adolescents. But of course not, especially. And so, they were working class, and they were Black and they were living in Augusta during the Masters. They didn't have a chance of getting covered. And they also had a really terrible investigator assigned to their case who I feel go ahead and sue me. I feel did not do his due diligence in the case. So,
Well, hopefully no one sues you for that.
well, I got a lawyer.
Good.
Forward the number to your lawyer onto us. We'll speak offline about that.
I'm saving it with my Kroger seltzer in case you think I'm having fun. So.
Well, yeah, you've done such incredible work with the fall line and all the cases you've covered too. And I looking here in the chat room, you did a whole season on, let's see, the Grady baby kidnappings.
Yeah, that was fascinating to work on because, to my knowledge, I'm the only person who's actually put all those together. That was interesting. That was season 3. That started out with me reading about a kidnapped baby whose name is Raymond Lamar Green. And he was kidnapped on November 5th, 1978. He was born on November 1st, 1978. And then I read about a second kidnapping that happened in the early 90s, and that was Tavish Sutton. And I was interested because then I read a statistic that said for a certain period of time, Grady Memorial in Atlanta had the highest rate of infant abductions. But of course, those are the only 2 outstanding abductions. So I got one nice thing about my job is I have access to a lot of newspaper repositories, and then I have some other stuff I can get into. So I just really started researching, and I came up with, my brain's like a sieve, and I'm on a case right now, and so numbers escape me, but 7 or 8 total kidnappings. Most were actually juveniles who had kidnapped babies. Only a few of the kidnappers were adult women, but the 2 babies who were definitely taken and were not found were kidnapped by adult women. I think there were 4, I take that back, 4 adult women and 4 juveniles who kidnapped babies from Grady. And the maternity ward just had very little security. But it wasn't because they didn't want to have security. It's a county hospital that was just really understaffed, and just dealing with a large percentage of our population in the city. We have a huge city, and so many people were there. But we're looking at like 1978 to 1996, these kidnappings happened. And so we were able to track them down, and the cases down, and actually able to speak to not only to Donna, who was sort of the main focus. Donna Green's the mother of Raymond Green, and she actually has become a really good friend of ours. We are on the board of her nonprofit that's forming now, but also to speak to one of the mothers whose baby was returned. But she had this really kind of terrifying experience where the kidnappers were like, no, it's our baby. And this is the early 80s. So they had to go through really long blood tests to prove whose baby it was. The baby was held by the state even after she was found. And it was just this really tense situation for weeks as they waited to see, who was going to get the baby. So that was a really incredible piece to work on.
Good.
And with these kidnapped babies cases, they don't have pictures of the babies because they're so new. Like in Donna's case, there's no picture. So Kelly Lawson, who is the GBI forensic artist here, she and her mother are actually, she's a legacy. Her mother was the first female GBI artist ever, and she's the second. But she worked with Donna to give her a portrait of Raymond because she doesn't have one, based on Donna and her other children's pictures. But it's just, it's one of the worst stories I've ever read. Like she didn't even make it into the paper, except on page 6 on one little tiny article. And then when she came back to Atlanta to check on the file, they had no file on him at all at APD. And she actually take the article in to prove that he existed. So that otherwise they just thought that she was, someone coming in and just making a false report, to prove that her baby had actually been kidnapped.
How common is this? Because we have someone in the chat here that's Tiff in the chat said, my distant cousin was kidnapped at birth and my family spent more than 20 years searching for him. They found him. He was in his 20s using his fingerprints when he applied to be a cop. Crazy.
This happened a lot more, actually. It was fairly common. Infant abductions out of hospitals were much more common. Up through, it's when they started, like, I know that, like, Tim and I both have kids, and Lance, you don't,
I
right?
don't think so.
When you when you go and you have a baby at the hospital, they put like a low jack system on the baby. They put like an alarm on the actual baby. Like mom has an alarm, dad has an alarm, baby has an alarm. And like if the baby leaves the maternity ward, the alarm goes off. But they didn't have that, so it was really easy to take a baby up until about 15, 16, 17 years ago. So we really are seeing like a fair number of these cases from that period of time. People would actually, the most common way of doing it was dressing as a nurse and then making it onto a ward and taking a baby, coming into a room and saying, let me, take the baby. Because a lot of times they'll take the baby so mom can sleep.
Are you actually saying that someone would go into the hospital dressed like a nurse and take the baby?
There's several cases like that on the season. Yeah, that's how more than one. Carlina White, Kamaya Mobley, I believe in both of those cases, they were both eventually. Well, Carlina White solved her own kidnapping. Actually, she found a picture of herself, but they were both, I believe, cases where the kidnapper dressed as a nurse. And they believe that happened in the Tavish Sutton case as well. A woman in Donna Green's case snuck on the maternity ward and befriended her and pretended to be a relative of another person who was there. And then asked for a ride home, and then figured out where Donna lived, came to visit her a few days later to check on the baby and stole Raymond.
Gosh, that.
Yeah. There's just no security.
That is downright terrifying. Yeah, just that visual too. Someone walking around dressed as a nurse in a maternity ward there to take a baby is just kind of scary.
Is this so that them?
So they can raise them usually. Yeah. I mean, it's moved more into. I mean, I don't want to get into too ghoulish, but that's where the rise of fetal abduction has come from. It's become so much more difficult to kidnap babies from hospitals and from other more secure locations.
And I just want to point out that Michelle is on fire with the links here. She put a link in there for the kidnapping of Carlina White and a link in there for missingkids.org for Raymond. Yeah.
For Raymond. And his mom has an outreach to Michelle. If you type in Raymond Green International Outreach of Hope, that should come up too. That's his mom's. She's like this close to getting her nonprofit status. It's real close. So that's
okay. Yeah, that does seem pretty heavy. We had an episode this week where we talked really only for a segment, like 15, 20 minutes about Ayla Reynolds, who was an infant. I think she was 19 months old from Maine. And it's just really disturbing covering cases of victims that young or missing babies.
Yeah, I don't know if you're not aware of that, look it up. It's such a breakdown and failure of the system where someone should not have been in charge of this child. It's really tragic, and it was not expected when she started about that. I didn't think that it was going to go in that direction, but anywho.
So you did a season not long ago on the victims of Samuel Little, the serial killer Samuel Little, and this is a 2020 season you did, and we might as well take the opportunity to invite your researcher Brian on now, if that sounds good with you. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, if it's okay with him.
He is in the chat room.
Brian, are you still there?
Or at least his icon is. He's there. Okay, so he'll hopefully he'll pop in. So Samuel Little recently passed away too.
I mean,
okay, great.
Brian,
What's up, Brian? How you doing?
I'm doing pretty
Um,
well. I'm good to be here. Wow. Laura, thank you so much for saying what you said back there. I really do appreciate it. I being brought on for the season for Sam Little was very interesting. Going into it, I'd known that there was only a year and a half of research done on this man's confessions because this was in mid 2018. Investigators have been looking to scramble to match cases to confessions, and they've been able to do, give or take to my own personal estimate, a little over 60. Some of them have yet to be confirmed publicly. Some, depending on the investigating agency, some details may be left out, but it's always been a case where these were women who were on the margins. They were sex workers, they were drug addicts, they were, for the most part, they were black women. And in certain cases, like the case of Fredonia Smith, she was simply a black girl out with her boyfriend looking to get ice cream, was not involved with anything illegal, and simply was abducted by Little and because they saw an opportunity in her. And it's very not that I want to be able to devaluate the lives of sex workers at any point, but I feel like people do want to put a general pass of, okay, this is a woman who did this type of work. She may have been higher at risk, and therefore all of Sam Little's victims were like this, but that's not really the case. In fact, with Little, a good amount of the cases that have been matched to him so far have been women who have been church singers, women who have simply been hard on their luck, or they were just looking for an opportunity and they quote unquote fell into a spider web. It's very much just it's a shame to see, and I've talked with the many other relatives or some of the relatives so far, and they're happy to see that he's passed now that it's been a good 2 years. But even though he's passed on, there's still that general sense of there are 30 or so remaining confessions to corroborate, and so there's a bit of pressure to do that. Recently, there is a woman up in Cincinnati who's looking to close a case in the early 1980s. This woman was believed to have been killed by a cool cigarette billboard. Honestly, at this point, I'm very much ranting. So, if by any means you want to have space,
It's a cool. No, it's in Cincinnati, and they think they found her under Cool's billboard. I just was reading about that again. There's a lot of open cases still, and I think to Brian's point about Little's victim pool, I think the important thing to note there is that one commonality is that he would pick women who he thought no one would miss. And so he was really making an assessment based on how he thought society would view people. Whether or not it was, like the example of one victim, she was walking on New Year's Eve to church, right? Or Fredonia Smith, who was going to get ice cream, right? It's not about what the victims were or weren't doing, which is really none of our business. It's about how Samuel Little viewed the victims and how he would make a judgment about how hard someone would try to solve their case. And I think, in some cases, people tried very hard, but in other cases, he was very right. And I think that's what it comes back to. You know what I mean? And so I think that's what Brian was getting to. But one thing I wanted to bring Brian on was that he gave me some new information today, actually, about how Samuel Little died. And so I was hoping you would tell everybody that.
Well, it was quite interesting leaving 2020 with the idea of Sam Little dying and not going to the new year with his perspective on closing out cases, and LAPD, I think, gave out a very vague idea about how he had died. There was Little had very much a lot of health concerns. He had diabetes, he had a heart disease, and it only came out recently, I believe in the last 2 or 3 days, that apparently he had contracted COVID and he had died of it.
Yep.
Oh no.
And he's not the
There was
only
a
one,
couple.
right? There's a couple. Yeah, there's been several who've been, these high profile cases who've died of
Oh no, I
COVID.
was just
I'm
simply
sorry, what
going
were
to
you gonna say,
say,
Tom?
in the 45, it's in the 20 or so days that have passed since, actually, no, it's not even been 20 days. A little bit over, under. Since December 25th, 45 California prisoners, including Little, have died because of COVID complications.
Insane. It's two conversations, right? The protections that are given to prisoners is one conversation, and you can have an opinion, a strong opinion either way about that. And then the other conversation is what Little might have offered had he not died. I personally feel like it was a bit of poetic justice that he died. Hearing that he COVID. Maybe that's just me in the moment. And you also said you've lost his perspective on what he could give to closing out cases. Do you think that if he was still alive, that he would have given information?
Well, I think he's given plenty of information as is. I think what I'd be looking for with Little, should he be alive today, would simply be confirming these cases. When you take a look at this victim that was recently identified in Florida, there was a girl he confessed to murdering in 1971, 72, who he believed was named Linda. And they were able, with his assistance, to close his case, and they matched it to a 1977 murder of a girl named Dorothy Gibson. Now, in Dorothy's case, he not only was off by 6 years and completely did not get her name, it may have been a street name that she provided, or it could have been an alias of sorts, but he actually committed a crime that eventually another man would be convicted of. And this was a man that was a scapegoat for several other Florida deaths. And four wrongful
convictions.
I actually read over the article. It was actually a little bit closer to like 9 or 10.
He had four or five wrongful convictions that got overturned. Yeah, I just quickly was looking at Jerry Frank Townsend. It was a false confession case. He was cognitively disabled, and it seems like it was a coerced confession. And this is the case that Brian's talking about, had a pretty high profile because it was one of a group that he confessed to. So Samuel Little had confessed to killing a young woman named Linda, really like
she was 17,
a teenager, right? 17 or 18. Yeah, very young. Yeah. And then we have Dorothy Gibson, who had never been connected to this Linda, of course, because Samuel Little hadn't confessed to it. And then Townsend had confessed to 4 or 5 of these murders. Eventually, he was cleared by two for sure via DNA, and then 2 were thrown out, was what I was reading. And then they tied the 2 that cleared him by DNA to a serial rapist and murderer who also just died of COVID. So that's, so this is coming up. A few people have asked about this, is how many wrongful convictions are they going to see tied into Little cases? And I that's another thing I keep thinking about with these cases that are still open, is how many of these are going to be wrongful convictions. They're going to eventually need to be addressed.
And so was Little helping to identify them? I know he confessed, but what was the process in this case, say, of Dorothy? They brought him a picture or something like
that.
Ryan, you take that.
It is essentially investigators going to Little or mailing information. I'm not sure what the process was like during COVID or this past year and how they reached out to him, but from what I know, it would be they would send out details of the general area these women were killed in, photos of the victim, details about what they were wearing, and Little would essentially say something to the effect of, "Oh yeah, that's her," or he would confirm nor negate. There's actually, I think in a very brief documentary, a process of him. he's being read names aloud of murder victims, and he's just saying, no, I never did that. I never would confess to that. He knew exactly which cases he'd committed. By no means would he ever falsely partake his involvement in a case just because it was similar. He wanted to make sure that, grossly enough, that each one of his quote unquote babies was verified and corroborated.
He did. He was really focused on, it's a power thing with him too.
Mhm.
You know, he is not a Henry Lee Lucas. People assume he's a Henry Lee Lucas, but he's not. He wasn't going along with it. He didn't like it when people would bring him like a reconstruction. He didn't like how it looked. Like this would be the Dade County Jane Doe. He was really unhappy with that reconstruction, who eventually she was identified as Patricia Parker. We talked about this with you on the show. When we came on, she had just been identified right after we finished the season. She was a victim who was found in Tennessee. She was from Tennessee and she was found in Georgia, Brian. Yeah, thank you. You know, geography is not my strong point. And then she was eventually identified as a woman named Patricia Parker. But when the GBI reconstruction was done, he was really upset with the reconstruction, you know, and he didn't like it. He said that doesn't look like her. A Henry Lee Lucas type is going to say, yeah, that's her.
For anyone who doesn't know what you meant with that reference, not a Henry Lee Lucas. Michelle even mentioned, so not a Henry Lucas. Can you give a description of what that means? Or a really long description?
Sure. Henry Lee Lucas, AKA the Confession Killer, I believe. Henry Lee Lucas traveled around with Otis Toole. Otis Toole has generally been accepted as the murderer of Adam Walsh. I know a lot of people don't necessarily agree with that, but John Walsh has said that he does believe that Otis Toole killed Adam Walsh. Henry Lee Lucas certainly killed several people, but he spent some time in the 70s and perhaps even into the mid 70s, mid 80s, and the confession started in the mid 80s.
Yeah, in the mid 80s.
He spent a lot of mid 80s. Yeah, he spent a lot of time confessing, and he kind of went on a world tour of confessions. People from all over the United States were closing their cases with him, and he got wild with it. He was saying that he and Otis Toole, who was a friend of his, had been part of basically like this assassin group. I mean, it gets crazy. They said they had assassin training and like satanic panic had to come in, right? So there's like a satanic panic angle, and they closed all of these cases. You may know that the Doe who was known as Orange Socks. I bet you know her.
Yep.
Do you know her real name? Of
course, it is Deborah Jackson.
Thank you. See, Brian is an encyclopedia, and I am a pasta strainer.
Come on. You know about more these cases. Well, you know what Jeanette and Danette than I do.
I know what I'm working on. Exactly. Like I know, like Georgia Lee Moses right now, which is the case, what I'm working on. I know that case back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Georgia Lee is very.
That's what my head is full of right now. But Henry Lee Lucas confessed to all these crimes, and then of course it began to unravel because he'd say, "Yep, I did that in California," and they're like, "But you were in Florida." So the long and short of it is, he killed a couple of people. There's a Netflix documentary if you're interested to watch it, but it really is kind of a mix of a miscarriage of justice, coerced confessions, bad law enforcement practices, a lot of different stuff. And I think when Sam Little came out, it just, people assumed that he was going to be another Henry Lee Lucas, right?
For sure.
And then
I remember.
I did it first.
Those headlines, killer confesses to 90 murders. No way.
But then I heard who he had been killing, and then I believed it, because Gary Ridgway, Gary Ridgway would have killed so many more people if he had been transient.
Mm-hmm.
Gary Ridgway, his number is so close, but they knew, like I said in the podcast, they knew about the Green River Killer because he stayed in one place. He had a name. Samuel Little didn't have a name. He had one really rude name, I don't really want to say, in one really small area in California, but they didn't connect it to all of his crimes, you know? He was invisible. And I think, so I absolutely believed it, because if you move around the country and you operate among people who the police are not going to pay much attention to, without the advent of DNA technology, with those 3 cases in California.
Yeah, and in the beginning of this, you
these would not have
said
been
that you wanted
solved.
to
So
clear up any preconceived notion that he was a genius serial killer, and that whole concept that he played, the game, and he was, he had this like criminal mastermind that was going on. What is the core of what made him successful?
he got out of town. He picked his victims carefully. He got out of town quickly. He had very few ties to the world. He just lived a consistently transient lifestyle. He did about 10 years in prison, if you put it all together, for various crimes. I mean, and some of them were pretty serious, things like armed robbery and assault. But he got out and he moved. He just stayed on the move. I mean, he traveled all over the country. And when he worked small jobs, but most of what he did was like cash economy stuff, like, selling and reselling items. He did that quite a bit. He had a girlfriend who was a good bit older than him, and she was really good and she traveled with him during all of this, by the way.
Well, not all of it, but a good amount of it.
Well, not all of it. Sorry. Yeah. A good hunk of it. Yeah. She traveled with him for what, like 20?
Yeah, from about 71
20?
to 88, 17 years.
There you go. Yeah, 17 years. She traveled with him, and she was actually quite, I would say, a talented reseller. Like, they'd buy stuff and resell it. That's like how they made a god amount of money, or they would shoplift and resell. And just that cash economy as well. Like, you don't leave. He used aliases, and it was so much easier to use an alias in the 70s, I mean, like, he went to trial under an alias
How does
twice.
that happen?
More than twice. I mean, maybe
How
for
does
murder
that
charges
happen?
twice.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you just have a fake ID or something when you got arrested, and I mean, what?
I don't think we ever found out, did
I
we?
quite honestly can't recall. I'd imagine that it's simply the leniency of the lack of technology, as well as the intercommunication of police at this time. It was very easy to just provide a name and then be kind of taken at face value for it.
Dr. Shiloh's right. He did have a 17-year-old he traveled with. The 17-year-old was not fully, we don't think fully cognizant of what was really happening.
No.
As far as we know, like we have the transcripts of all of his police interviews. They picked him up at a hotel, and they were like, "You can travel with us if you'll do some of the driving." Because Little's girlfriend, guys, sorry, I totally spilled seltzer on my keyboard during this. So I've just been like subtly shaking it, while trying to have a serious conversation. Little, he would do a lot of the driving because Gene was not great with the eyesight. But he would stay in the hotel, and then he knew something strange was going on, because in the mornings, Gene would wash blood and sometimes human waste and stuff out of the car, but she didn't acknowledge it, like as if she doesn't see it, it's not happening. The kid didn't acknowledge it, but he was super freaked out. He eventually, I think, made it back to Arkansas, as far as we know, and was later interviewed by the police. But he doesn't seem to have any particular like culpability, but it is a really interesting angle.
I know, right?
An hour just flies by.
How has an hour
talk
gone
about
by?
this.
Has it?
Oh my God.
I want to know. I want to ask Brian a question. Brian, how do you do your research?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, my research, at least for Sam Little, it comes down to it's Google alerts. I go through newspapers. I take a look at pretty much everything that comes out on him. I have put together the tiniest pieces of information on victims, ranging from, I have quite literally gone onto the 60 Minutes program. I have taken a look at confessions and portraits. There was a sketch of a victim who was found in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, on there that was never released to the public, and I was able to take a quick screen grab of that, and we were able, and sorry, not we, there was a circulation on social media by the Fall Line regarding her portrait. So it's just simply being a hawk on top of any new content that comes out. I really recommend the Washington Post series. There is that 60 Minutes coverage. There's so much out there that on a surface level can be very minute, but the more you dig into it, the more you'll be like, oh, that's a newspaper clipping that you can look at on newspapers.com. Oh, that's a portrait of the victim. Could I maybe image reverse search it? It comes down to just looking at everything at once and kind of just dissecting it. And a lot of that research went into the season for the Fall Line, which I was handled very appropriately and great, if I must say so myself.
And he had when he rolled up with his own giant chart when I met him.
Gosh.
Like he already had his own giant chart. Like it was pre-made. So when we started talking, and that's when I was like, can I hire you, please? And he doesn't just work. Brian is my primary research assistant, actually. So, he and I work together quite a lot. How a research assistant works with me on stuff is I will be like, please go find, I don't want to spoil anything we're working on, but I'll be like, please go find me articles on this, right? And so then when I read them, and Brian can find everything because he was doing all of this stuff before he had access to the things that I pay for.
Fresh out of college, what do you expect?
So now he has access to the paid subscriptions from, the middle-aged person. So now he can really get in there.
20 years old.
Oh, it's okay. As long as I don't look middle-aged, my friend, I'm not worried about it. I can be a crone as long as my forehead's not moving.
A day over 27, trust me.
This is why I pay him. But so he does I forgot what we were talking about
research
now.
And how it's conducted.
Oh, how it's conducted. So he'll put together a document for me of articles. I know everyone does it differently. Some people like to have the research all prepared for them, outlined and stuff. I like to see all of the raw pieces because that's how I can see the little trails of things that need to be followed. And then I go and do my own research and say, I want this. And then I start digging and looking into stuff and I can build a narrative. But that's how he and I work if anyone's kind of interested. But for the little series, seriously, he was really my equal in terms of research, and he also did the fact checking. I do want to stress that. He went through the entire series and checked every single fact.
Twice, 3 times. I wanted every little detail to be precise. No pun intended.
Yeah, because it's gonna, we have not done something on a national scale before. So it was really important to get every single little tiny, down to it wasn't the cigarette pack that was found next to the body, it was a bottle. Yep. You know what I mean? Just
the wig that was next to her body.
Oh, Brian, I gotta say, your voice, the way you've articulated all of your points has really moved people in this Get Vocal tonight, as well as myself. I actually, the 3 sentences in, I texted Tim and I said, this is incredible. How did you manage that? Do you have training?
Well,
actually, now you're gonna force me to sing.
I do sing. Quite frankly, I just come from a background of debate and speech, and I placed number 6 in the state of North Carolina my year of high school, so I think that counts for something. I thank you. People say this to me a lot, but I always kind of take it in stride because it's just my voice, and I don't pay too much attention to it. I just focus on the actual quality of what I say and what I try to articulate. But thank you.
Oh, really? Very cool.
You're going to sing us out of this episode?
Singer.
We could have danced all night. I don't know.
That was very good. I appreciate it.
Better than anyone else has ever done on the show.
Wow.
If you need somebody for an outro or an intro song,
we will be contacting you.
I want that. We already got it.
Yeah.
We'll license it from you.
And what's the
Yes, please, of course.
Yes.
what's the post behind you? I've been trying to figure that
recent
out.
college grad.
Oh my God, this poster. Okay, so I live, wow, a 20-something-year-old who's young and lives at home with their family. I live with my brother. We are a bit of a hockey family, and by that I mean I don't watch sports at all, even though my brother does. Um, fun fact: I technically have a tie to the championship of, oh my God, no, the Hall of Fame for ice hockey. I got an uncle who is in the died in the early 50s, who was a huge player for the Canadians back in the day. And is that going to be my claim to fame? Probably, if it's not going to be Red Grave research. But, I'll take what I can with stride. And speaking of Red Grave research, I do want to quickly say uh, the company that I do intern under has been very, very, it's been very generous. Laura knows the people who run it, Anthony and Lee. They are incredible people to be taught for, and the ideas of forensic genealogy and simply how to go about handling and responding to a disappearance or a murder or something that's long cold. And it's been crazy. I'm not sure if you heard about the case
Sound
of
familiar.
Delta Dawn. Delta Dawn.
These are
These are
doe
Doe
cases.
cases. This is a 18-year-old baby who was found deceased on the banks of a river in 1982. Our team was able to take a look at the DNA matches that we had gotten from her kit, and we were able to eventually identify her nearly 38 years later. And we also solved another case up in Canada, which was one of Canada's most infamous cases. It was the murder of a young girl named Christine Jessup. There was a man who was wrongfully accused of her murder, and he spent some time in prison. The country, even though he was eventually exonerated, the country still hated him and believed he'd done it until this year, where we were able to find out the person who had actually done it. And it's still being looked into right now. I'm sure it's very good to see these cases being solved 30, 40, so many years later than what they had actually been done. But it's amazing to have this opportunity both under Red Grave Research as well as under Laura to be able to just be involved in this hemisphere. It's great work. I do love it. I really can't thank all of you enough for the opportunity that you presented me with, which I've told them multiple times, but I'll say it again, just
Wow.
make
Very
sure.
cool. Yeah, it seems like you've
I'm completely
done some
dependent.
great work here, Brian.
I'm completely dependent on you. Don't worry.
Thank you.
I just dropped a headless torso link in there, by the way, for that really old case. It's like 100 years
yes.
old. That would be worth you guys actually looking
for
into.
sure.
That might be a cool episode. That's
Yeah.
solved.
I won't spoil too much, but it is the person who was identified in this case wasn't born in the state of Utah. They were born in the Providence of Utah.
Wow.
That's a good.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Well, I don't know if we're gonna have.
Great.
I don't know if we can have you on our show.
Yeah, no.
This is better, as in that we can't do. Sorry.
Oh well, the red graves you could get. So Anthony, it was Anthony, our friend Anthony Redgrave and Lee Redgrave were the forensic genealogists on that case. So anyway, yeah, there's a much better article, but that's the only one I could pull out. So that's almost
snap.
as old as land.
Well, everyone,
Michelle.
it's been another great Thursday night here live on Get Vocal. The
Thanks,
Fall
Jason.
Line. Make sure to check out the Fall Line, Laura and Brooks show, and Brian and his amazing research as a contributor as well. And thank you, Jason, again in the chat room with some V-Coins. We appreciate it. And we will be back here next week.
Hopefully not.
Hours.
Still fuzzy right now.
You're still fuzzy.
I feel like my fuzzy.
Oh yeah,
about
you're
to say.
fuzzy.
Brian's voice. So when you hear Brian, feel nice and fun.
That's really sweet. I was going to say something a little bit offhanded about how I'm on an iPhone.
You look sharp.
Yet I still
Yeah,
don't know
looks
how this
good.
quality
Yep.
looks. So
Yeah, I don't know.
Pretty
Okay.
good.
thank you.
All
Unlike
right,
Lance.
everyone. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. We will see you next time. Thanks, Laura and Brian.
Till next
Have a
week.
good
All
one.
Bye,
And thank
guys.
you, chat room. We will see you next week, 9 p.m.
Bye.
Bye.